I'd like to welcome David Paterson, Ontario's representative in Washington, D.C. David was appointed to the Ontario position in November 2023 and brings 30 years of business experience serving as chair of the board of directors of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, as well as four other boards. Previously, David was the lead corporate environmental relations in for GM Canada. He also served as senior VP, government relations and public policy at BlackBerry, formerly Research in Motion, as we all know, and before that was SVP, Public Affairs at Manulife Financial. Welcome back to the show, David.
Thanks, Alan.
So great to have you. And obviously, at a time when everybody's starting to talk about trade, although I guess we probably never stopped talking about trade, but it's coming front and center with obviously, I guess depending on where you live, USMCA or CUSMA, however you want to call it, coming up for discussion already I'm sure in discussion. And that kind of takes me to my first general question for you, obviously being our representative in Washington and really close to what's going on and the trade talks. I guess I would start off by asking, what is the current state with respect to trade talks between Ontario and the United States? Sometimes we hear a lot, sometimes we don't hear much. And so I guess we'd start off just generally, what's the current state?
Well, I think we're in a transition to really a 6-month sprint uh, for Canada and the United States to make decisions with respect to the USMCA relationship. Mexico will be part of that discussion as well. As we know, last year the federal government made efforts to try and get some changes to some of the sectoral tariffs that had been put on Canada, particularly with regard to our sectors like automotive and steel and aluminum. That didn't happen, but I think all of those talks will now combine together with a bit more of a organized process around what things can we do to address issues that are outstanding with regard to the USMCA and what options does the United States want to take going forward in that regard. So those things are all coming together. But there's a bit of a clock on us right now because July 1st is sort of the deadline to which the parties need to sit down and decide, do we have a way to go forward, or do we want to get in perpetual annual renegotiation? And sounds like a whole bunch of uncertainty to me and to business. And so I think we really want to make sure that we try and resolve issues and get there by Canada Day.
Yeah, and I guess we don't want these issues to keep coming up every year, as you said. Is this going to be something every year, or we're going to have more of a longer lasting agreement? I guess from here in obviously in Ontario, in Toronto, we hear a lot of different things. We hear a lot of comments by the president, President Trump, recently saying that he hasn't even thought about USMCA as yet. And obviously, president says a lot of things, and some might be, on the mark and some maybe not so on the mark. But how important do you think renegotiating Kuzma is to the Trump administration when he is making comments like that? Do you think it is important to them, and are they taking it seriously even at this stage?
Well, it is very important to them. I think that's true. And I think we've all learned that sometimes we have to sort of put comments through the negotiation translation machine and make sure that we are prepared and we've done our homework and deal with the issues that are being raised. But if we can separate signal from noise a little bit on this, it's really important to understand this is the most important trade relationship the United States has with Canada and Mexico, and it really dwarfs all the others that are out there. And I think that's part of the reason why you saw some changes in resolution with other countries in some of the tariff discussions that took place last year, like Japan and with South Korea and the EU. Many of them still not completed and not fully certain, but our relationship's much bigger, and we are their biggest customer in Canada. That's really important to remember. We're a wealthy country. We buy a lot of goods from the United States, and we have this deeply integrated supply chain. And so we're really codependent in many, many ways. The president may not want to talk about that first and foremost, but there's many, many aspects of American self-interest that rely on Canada, and also the things that are important for America's growth and future of their economy is linked to that as well. So we can be confident if we think about that and understand it and really start from that perspective. And I think that gives us the best pathway forward to discussion.
Yeah, and you hear also, Trade Representative Jameson Greer recently. I saw him in an interview saying, that the U.S. can go about things on their own, and you continue to hear that kind of rhetoric, and we all know that that's probably not the case. But do you think, do you think that the markets are undervaluing right now Ontario's strategic importance to the U.S.? Like, are they, minimizing how important we actually are? Is this a trade tactic or a negotiation tactic? Or do they really think that we're not as important?
I'm not sure if the markets are undervaluing Ontario because we see an awful lot of interesting issue or interest into Ontario as more of a bit of a predictable safe haven for certain types of investment. And keep in mind that what we're talking about when we're talking about tariffs and trade and the USMCA is largely our trade in merchandise goods, which is the traditional parts of our economy. But, our finance world and our digital world in many cases, and many of the other things that we do within the Canadian economy amongst ourselves don't really fall into that bucket as much. And but the traditional trade in goods is really intertwined. We build things together with Mexico and with Canada and the United States. And so um, I think, in valuating it from the market point of view, it depends on where you're looking. I mean, if we step right back and say, what are the opportunities as investors looking into the marketplace? I think those are probably people trying to understand where is AI going? Where is you take a look at the value of the S&P right now, and it's dominated, of course, by semiconductor chips and the big technology companies out of the United States. And so we are a pretty important part of that, whether it comes from the fact that if we're going to have artificial intelligence, boy, do we need a lot more electricity. Well, we know a lot about electricity. We have, a leadership in nuclear power, which is really very significant and important if we're going to be successful in that area. And similarly, we hear an awful lot about the importance of critical minerals. We never really did hear a lot about that for years and years, but we in Canada, of course, through the Toronto Stock Exchange and just our history, we are the center of the world when it comes to raising money for mining and certainly expertise. Just Sudbury alone and the production of nickel, high grade nickel. You can't run the American military or the auto sector without high grade nickel. And there is no nickel in the United States. There's no refining of nickel in the United States. And you could say the same thing about aluminum out of Quebec. So there's a lot of those types of things that you really just have to look at on an integrated basis and sort of ask the question, what is the value proposition? What is the thesis for North America going forward? And where does that fit vis-a-vis China? Where does it fit with Europe? And if I'm the United States, I'm going to want my closest allies at my side to be able to be successful in that world. So that's what gives me confidence as we look forward to some of these things getting sorted out. But it's not to underestimate how difficult it's going to be. It will be challenging, and yeah, there might be a little bit of politics along the way, Alan.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Are large U.S. equity firms and corporations, are they still committing capital to Ontario projects at this time, or has that kind of slowed down or stopped?
Yes, and not just not just even North American funds or American funds, but out of Europe and around the world. And we've seen the Prime Minister traveling to the Middle East, and he's in China today. And part of that is his core expertise of being able to raise money around the world for things. We have a clear focus on trying to do big things again in Canada. For us, In Ontario, that would include the Ring of Fire, something that has just taken far too long to move ahead with, and yet, we're probably sitting on some of the world's largest titanium and other types of things which are absolutely critical for the future. And continue to invest in our infrastructure in electricity and in the West, getting our energy resources to Tidewater. So these are big, big investment opportunities as long as there is a return. And a lot of those we have large investors taking a look at right now. But one of the things you will want is to remove some of the uncertainty that comes from uncompleted trade discussions. And so we really do need to get through as quickly as we can this kind of set of discussions. I think it's more than just making an objective of completely removing tariffs. We would like to do that. I think we're now in a changed world where tariffs are going to be part of that world going forward. And we're probably looking more at issues of relative competitive advantage for Canada. And as the Prime Minister likes to mention, we are in the most favored position in the world in terms of the lowest tariff rates with the United States right now. But we're used to having zero, and we're used to having open market access. And so it's a very uncomfortable shift, and it is extremely upsetting if you're in some of the sectors that are being hit, like steel and like automotive and the like. So we have some really hard work to do, and that's why Premier Ford has been really standing up. Sometimes I wish business was standing up a little bit more and maybe didn't have to do it quite as hard as he has. But we've got to stand up for our future.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And I think you may have already answered a bit of this question, but it's a question I get probably most often from businesses in and around Toronto, small businesses north of Toronto, et cetera. And what they're saying is obviously, you mentioned tariffs many times already, but with the tariffs that the United States has put on goods and obviously trying to favor domestic production, that's what President Trump wants, right? Things produced in the US. How can Ontario ensure that it remains competitive within North America? Why is a business going to come do invest in Canada when they could invest in the United States? Or is it going to be because some of the stuff, as you've mentioned, that we produce that they don't? What's our competitive advantage? Why would someone
Hmm.
want to come to our province of Ontario? And we know, talking to the premier recently, $28 billion of new investment last year, a great number, and hopefully bigger this year. But why would someone choose? What's our competitive advantage to win business?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mistake to think that the only competitive advantage is unfettered access to the United States market. That is critical. And from some of the industries I've worked in, the automotive industry, for instance, the only reason that you have auto manufacturing in Canada is because we can rationalize production for a full North American market. Producing in Canada in a factory, uh, in the auto sector for just the Canadian market alone, which would be less than 2 million out of 17 million vehicles bought every year, it doesn't pencil. But there are lots of other areas of development. I've talked about a few of them in terms of energy and mineral development. But I would go further in terms of where a lot of investors are focused right now, and that is, what is our digital future? Where is AI going to be deployable in a way to really supercharge productivity of different businesses? We have some incredible capabilities in Ontario. Literally, we're the creators of things. Everything from I had the honor of working for Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsley. We created the smartphone in Ontario. We are the pioneers of artificial intelligence in Ontario, and the legacy of people that we have, and frankly, our ability to draw the best and brightest from around the world, more so than the United States, are all things that really are attractive, let alone trying to make sure that you have a dependable market for these kinds of things. the United States looks a little less dependable in some of those areas, and we see people looking at alternatives. And I haven't even mentioned, of course, the big shifts in terms of spending on defense, moving from Canada's perpetual underspending on defense to 5% of GDP is an enormous shift, and that speaks to opportunities in all the supply chains that go with that, whether it's steel for ships and technology for other things. And generally, as those expenditures take place, some infrastructure, some others, that really taps into some of these underlying capabilities. I always found it amazing in the auto industry. You think about it as being cars, but no, there's like 30,000 pieces that have to come together, and Canada can be, whether it's a sensor or capability for something that is uniquely important. And we have a setup in my old company in Markham, Ontario, with 1,200 people that are PhD level, best in the world at creating connectivity of vehicles to mobile networks and self-driving capabilities. That's the future, and we have it. We have that capability here in Canada. So we should be building that and really building on a portfolio of intellectual property out of Canada. I think if I was looking for one thing to invest in, it would be IP in the future.
Yeah, and I guess that takes me to my last question. We know all the risks, the geopolitical risks to Ontario, and maybe you've already said the answer to this question, but with obviously everything that's going on, there's also big opportunity, and I think you've touched on this throughout our interview here. But if you were the boss, if you could decide where to spend all the money or most of it or a big chunk of it, what would you say the biggest opportunity, or where would that biggest opportunity lie? Where should we be, what should we be capitalizing on here in Ontario? If we had to go forward, take all dust off your crystal ball, what would you say would be the best opportunity now going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is kind of staring us obvious in the face. You just look at the valuations on the stock market right now. It's intangible goods. So while and I spend a good portion of my time dealing with trade issues over merchandise trade. It's that digital economy of the future, founded in intellectual property and knowledge, goods that travel around the world. When I worked at BlackBerry, I was in charge of 175 markets for public policy, and you go into the backwaters of small Asian countries and see a logo for BlackBerry in the store. That's what we should do in Canada. We should be able to take something that moves quickly around the world and just think of what as a wealthy nation, what do we consume every day? Well, most of it's on our phone. Those types of things need to be developed. They need to be put together. And, I think that's where a lot of our future is, but we cannot turn our back on the kinds of things that, frankly, Donald Trump wants to preserve out of, the rust belts of America. Well, we want to preserve our auto sector too. They need each other. There's no question. America would lose about 140,000 jobs if they couldn't get access into the Canadian market for the vehicles that they make down there. So we want to preserve all of that, but we want to look at the future, investing in the future. And I think it's kind of an exciting time. Maybe that's the greatest legacy from Donald Trump, is to give us the kick in the what, so that we can make sure that we get thinking about fixing some of the perennial problems that have blocked us from taking care of our future going forward. That's what excites me and the premier I know, and so that to me is the good side of the ledger.
Yeah, the good side. And I've said it lots of times, if we come out better and stronger over the long term because of what's happening, I think it is a bit of a kick in the rear end there to get us all moving in perhaps a different direction. David Paterson, Ontario's representative in Washington, D.C. I want to thank you for taking some time out of your busy day. I know it's busy and probably going to get even busier over the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much for talking to us and telling us what's going on in Washington, the state of affairs with regards to trade. Much appreciated, and I'm sure we'll talk again down the road. And good luck with the negotiations.
Thanks, Alan. Good. We'll talk soon.
All the best. Take care.
Bye now.